They should be credited for giving me an award.
The Truth with Gwen Azama-Edwards, every Thursday at 6:15 on Goliath Radio. Gwen Azama-Edwards, retired city clerk, former city commissioner, City of Daytona Beach. The Truth.
Will you let me know when you find out who it is? Will you let me know when you find out who it is? Have a good night.
Stan, you've been sitting much too long, much too long. Welcome, 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 welcome to Truth, a radio program designed with you in mind, a program whose sole purpose is to empower you, our listeners, for information leads to knowledge, and knowledge is, you got it, power. And as always, I want to empower you to take control of your life, those things that impact you, your family, and your community. As always, too, why don't you go to the website at www.gwen-truth.com so you can access all of that all-powerful information, all those resource listings that will give you what you need so that you can be, hey, the super, super all-powerful, knowledgeable person to whom others can come because you have that access and you've got that knowledge. Shout out to Tom in Pelican Bay, a regular listener. Hi, Tom. Shout out to the NAACP in Flagler and Volusia County. Shout out to Cynthia Slater, who, when we were at the, my hubby and I at the Flagler County NAACP Freedom Fund banquet, the vice president of the NAACP acknowledged Cynthia Slater, so shout out to her as being a VP at the state level in ACP, but shout out to her too because she helped orchestrate the largest new voter registration amount nationwide through them and with them. It could be through a lot of others, I'm not sure, but she worked with the different chapters and they got over 130,000 new voter registrants. During a time when voters were being disenfranchised and everything else, she worked with others to get that done. So shout out to Cynthia Slater, president of the NAACP for Volusia County. And shout out to, of course, all of you, to all of our, especially all of our veterans, having just come off of Memorial Day, for all of those who paid the ultimate price and their family members. Shout out to all of you with our thanks and appreciation for job well done. And that job, irrespective of whether it was a win or a loss, the fact that you participated in a system to ensure that there was freedom, not only in our country, but freedom in other countries as well. That's freedom, not just democracy, but freedom. Shout out to you, and we thank you so very, very, very much. Our guest tonight is Chet Bell, and Chet is the CEO of the Stuart Marchman Act. He has a healthcare center. He'll clarify me on that, but I'll clarify what I've just said. But Chet is the man. As my kids used to say when I was the job service manager for Volusia Flagler County. They used to say I was the head. Anyway, but the head person. So he is the one where the buck stops when it comes to mental health in our area. And we're going to talk about some things that are really key and important. Whether you think you have a mental health issue or not, I can tell you that, a lot of people do have health issues, but they also have mental health issues. And there are services and there are programs that are available for you if you feel that you have such a need. Now, I'm sure as we go along, you will find that those services, the availability of them is somewhat limited. Why? Based on funding and the like. So I do want to welcome Chet Bell, the CEO for the Stuart Marchman Act.
Behavioral health care.
Behavioral health care. Now,
thanks, Gwen.
You provided me with that, and I wanted to ask you this. Has behavioral health replaced the moniker so much for mental health? do you say that now in place of mental health, or is mental health a portion of, or one of the things that fits under the behavioral health care?
Yeah, I think when we say behavioral health, what we're talking about is a variety of chronic diseases.
You're going to have to speak into it.
Okay, I'll get up closer.
Okay.
A variety of chronic diseases, and it includes the major psychiatric disorders and the major addiction disorders, whether it be addiction to alcohol, prescription drugs, illegal drugs. All of those fit into the behavioral health category. And then also chronic mental illnesses, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, depression. Those are the major areas that Stewart Marchman Act provides services for here in the community.
And so that our listeners know, because you're in Volusia and Flagler County, for my Flagler County listeners, and I'm sure they've been reading off and on about your center that's there, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but so that the listeners know, Stewart Marchman Act have been around for, at least Act has been around for 51 years or so, and Stewart Marchman then came a few years thereafter, and they have since combined. They've been combined, as you have shared, for the past 5 years. What is it? Because there are people sometimes who don't realize what it took and what it was that brought a service to an area, and truly what it took to make it possible. Now, was it 51 years ago that ACT Corporation was actually brought on the scene?
That's right. Initially called the Guidance Center. And it came about back during the Kennedy administration when the first community mental health block grants were issued by the federal government, back in this case in 1963. And subsequent to that, in the later 60s, there were the first community block grants for substance abuse treatment. And those, out of those first block grants came what was initially called the Halifax Area Court-Oriented Program. That was too big a mouthful, and eventually it was renamed after Judge Leon Stewart as Stewart Treatment Center, and then later included Hal Marchman's name, so that's where Stewart Marchman Center came from. And then, as you said, 5 years ago, we brought the two agencies, ACT Corporation and Stewart Marchman Center, together in order to treat the overlapping nature of behavioral health issues, because so many folks with addictive disease problems also have co-occurring mental health disorders. Probably anxiety and depression are the two foremost co-occurring disorders that we treat with addiction. And then people with severe and persistent mental illness, the way that they sometimes treat their symptoms is with alcohol, with other drugs, and most notably, and perhaps most unfortunately, with tobacco. And so all of those issues brought together is why we're now amalgamated into a behavioral healthcare system.
And I've, as you know, I've served on Alcohol, Drug Abuse, Mental Health Planning Council when we had it here in this area. I actually chaired that many years ago. And we talked about the what they call the entry drugs. Maybe there's another title to that. But you know, these were the things that people got somewhat addicted to, that actually got them started, and then they'd want something that was even stronger or had even more control over them. And those types of things, of course, were the cigarettes and the tobacco, and because there are various types of tobacco products, and the alcohol, and you know, those things were kind of entry drugs or substances to something harsher and stronger. And I was talking to you, I don't know if you want to get into this, but I was talking to you about, because it's a hot issue now, with so many states now legalizing marijuana, or they have the medical marijuana and the like. Just getting your input out. We won't hold you to it, but but about legalizing marijuana, because there's a big push on that now. And you were saying that that rather than legalizing it, what you would like to see is a decriminalization of.
Exactly. I think that legalization begs the question of how we should be dealing with all varieties of gateway drugs. legalization implies, yeah, it's okay. Decriminalization, I think, places particularly marijuana more in the category of it's wrong, it's unhealthy, you need to take a look at a correction in your behavior, but it's not the kind of activity for which we believe somebody should be incarcerated. We think that instead someone should be offered some education, some intervention, and the potential for a teachable moment, because there are a lot of teachable moments that need to be made about a variety of substances. People need to understand that they need to take a look at their own family history. They need to look at kind of the way that they're set up as a person and the way that their brain interacts with specific drugs, to get a sense as to whether or not their use, in this case of marijuana, could, quote, be recreational. And that seems to be what the legalization argument is all about, is make it recreational, just like alcohol can be recreational or that sort of thing. Our view on it is that by decriminalizing it, we can create the opportunities for educational and intervention programs that help people understand that making a decision to smoke pot is a pretty serious one that shouldn't be taken lightly.
Right. And the way I've usually take it is that once you say that it's okay to do something, which you're almost condoning it. And even though you say it's still a choice, there are some people who say, well, they wouldn't have it out here and allow me to do it if I couldn't do it, and if it wasn't good for me, or if it was bad for me. So, you know, there are pros and cons, and I know that there's a retired sheriff that's going around talking about legalizing marijuana, and one of his big points, which a lot of the people on the national scale are saying too, in terms of marijuana, is that there's a high price tag that's tied to that, that's taking a lot of money out of the economy that could be better spent. So however people fall on the side of that issue, the bottom line is that you've got these gateway products that actually are bringing people closer to the brink of moving to something that's stronger, that's actually more addictive, that's actually not good for them. When you think about it, it's not really good for them. And one of the things that you had mentioned is that is the new the legislation that was passed last legislative session that actually required a registration process and the like, and how is that working, and what is the effect that's having?
Well, I'll tell you, between the aggressive work that's been done by law enforcement across the state to...
And this is on the pill mills kind of thing,
to rid the state of the scourge of pill mills, and the prescription drug registry that allows for the ability to kind of track individuals who are doctor shopping, that sort of thing, to get prescription drugs to then resell.
I know, because even I had a bad cold, and one of the things that my doctor told me to get was Sudafed. You got to sign for Sudafed. You got to sign for. I told the guy, I said, hey, I'm not out here trying to do whatever, but I understand, and I support it. But can I please have some Sudafed so I can get better?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's that's another one of those opportunities for a teachable moment. Obviously, for you, that's not an issue, but for somebody else who's looking to use that in combination with other drugs to get high.
Absolutely.
We need to create those kinds of barriers. At any rate, relevant to the pill mills and prescription drugs, what we've seen is that the availability of those prescription drugs on the street has gone down dramatically. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, I think I've seen it's greater than a third, and that's saying a lot.
Well, exactly. Now,
and Florida was the pill mill state, wasn't it?
We were
like we are for a lot of
absolute,
stuff.
the absolute capital. That's the good news. The bad news is for people that are opiate dependent, if you can't get a hold of prescription drugs, then you're going to go back to some of the old pathways. And what we're seeing now in admissions into our detox unit is an increase in the number of people who are coming in who are dependent upon heroin, because there are still markets for illicit street drugs that are out there, and if you can't get the prescription drug, you'll go to the street drug. So the kinds of trends that we're seeing now involve heroin, They involve increased use of methamphetamine, and if you just look at the number of labs that are being tipped over around the area.
In good neighborhoods and bad.
All right, you know there's an increase there. And then the other area is these synthetic narcotics, these lookalikes for marijuana, that sort of thing, bath salts, those kinds of chemical combinations that are increasingly being used primarily for their hallucinogenic and their amphetamine-like impacts. And I think we'll all learn, I understood today, in fact, that the Attorney General was here in Volusia County and that there was a large raid on a synthetic drug ring operating, I guess, somewhere in southeast Volusia County. I'm going to be very interested to learn about that because hopefully that's going to take a lot of those kinds of drugs off the street too, and that'll be a very good thing.
And basically what you're indicating is that you can take the drugs away, but if you don't provide some kind of prevention, education, and support for those, and help for those who are already addicted, then you might be preventing it in terms of its growth or whatever, but for those who are already addicted, who have the problem, there's got to be something in place for them. Otherwise, all you're doing is, as you're saying, you're going from one that's available to another that's available, and that void is going to be filled by somebody and something.
Exactly. And that's where the treatment work that we do comes in. And I think, you know, what we've seen over the course of my career, which is kind of getting long now, is when I look back on it, because I've been involved in behavioral health here locally since 1980, what we see today is that no matter what your pathway is, whether it's through the criminal justice system or whether it's through a hospital or whether it's because a family member is concerned about you, we've got a lot of good pathways that all direct people towards treatment. If you're involved in the justice system, you can get treatment in the jail, you can get treatment through drug courts, you can get treatment through diversion out of the court system entirely into brief intervention programs. If you go to any hospital emergency room in the county, the folks in ERs are doing a better job of identifying people with substance use issues, with mental health issues, and getting them routed towards the correct type of care. And for me, that's the gratifying aspect of having been involved in this field for a long time, is that I feel that the access to behavioral health care in this community is better than it once was. Now that said, there's still a huge need. And this past year, what we've been seeing is the area that's of greatest concern is people who are in an acute mental health crisis. And that can be because of the onset of a chronic mental illness, it could be because of a recurrence of a mental illness, or it could be because of some of the psychoactive effects of some of these drugs that are being used, particularly these synthetic marijuana, bath salts, that sort of thing, that lead people to very paranoid and psychotic looking behavior. We can't keep up with the demand in emergency services. There are 84 beds, crisis beds in our community, 54 of them at Halifax Health, 30 beds at Stewart Marchman Act. And we've gone periods of time this spring, we coordinate very well between the two organizations. But really, since the beginning of the year, we've had periods of almost at all times, all 84 of those beds are filled. Our screening areas and emergency rooms at the hospital are filled with people needing those services. So while we probably work together more closely than we ever have before, we've got big issues regarding service need in this community.
And my major was psychology at Stetson, and my that was for my bachelor's, and then my master's in guidance and counseling. So I know just that and the way the first class that I took said is a very thin line between those who end up, you know, losing it mentally and those who actually kind of are able to kind of hold it together. So it always amazed me that there aren't more people seeking help, and there are a lot more people out there that are in need of the help. And I should tell our listeners, because I forgot to do it in the beginning, I'm Gwen Azama-Edwards, former city commissioner, retired city clerk. And I've done career counseling as well. I did that for several years and supervised with the Job Service of Florida. And I found out that in counseling people, even in terms of careers, what you find out is that, yeah, they don't have a job, but there's some other stuff behind that, that needs to be dealt with. And the good thing about our area is that we do have such a great system of safety nets and the like, organizations that are there to meet that kind of a need, to meet whatever needs really people find themselves falling short on. And in terms of those people, though, who are in need of mental health, you mentioned the limited number of beds. Is there a waiting list as well?
Yeah. You know, when you're talking about crisis services, when you're in an acute state and you need care, we're going to hold you in our screening areas, in our emergency rooms, that sort of thing, until we can provide you with that.
That's good to know.
That crisis care. But our whole area of work is being driven away from beds, from residential care, and more towards an outpatient model of care. And there's logic behind that. Part of the logic is that treatment outcomes don't seem to be, at least as they've been measured thus far through research, don't seem to be a whole lot better for residential stays than they do for outpatient stays. And there's also just the costs that are associated with it. But for safety net providers like SMA, Haven Recovery Center, in the community, we're working with people typically who not only have these severe behavioral health problems, but they got a variety of other things that are going on with them too. Homelessness, poverty, perhaps family histories that are so horrendous that they were never properly habilitated, if you will, in life. And for those individuals, they do seem to obtain a greater benefit from residential care. But at the same time, I can assure you that one of the trends that we're going to see going forward year over year is that we're going to see less residential care and more outpatient care in the community.
Yeah, and we can see the shortfall of that outpatient care when we see where someone is, there's a police standoff, or someone is threatening to either kill themselves or kill family members and the like, and you hear the family say he or she has been off their meds for a certain period of time.
Exactly, and I'd like to talk about that for a minute. One of the interesting health indicators here in Volusia County is that over the last few years, what's called our mortality statistics have been going the wrong direction. And the mortality issue, as Dr. Sorensen explained it to me, is the rate of death of individuals under the age of 75. Essentially it said, well, if you live to age 75, then you've kind of reached the normal lifespan, if you will. But if you die before age 75, then you're a mortality statistic, and you have not lived as long a life as you should have. And it's troubling that in Volusia County, over the last 4 years, our rate of premature death has increased from 833 individuals in 2010 to 8,975. Wow. It's going the wrong direction.
Right.
And part of the reason for that, frankly, is mental health in the community. Suicide rates. Suicide is growing exponentially, not only locally, but across the country. People are
all age groups
having increasing difficulty just coping with all of the issues associated with modern life, and to the point that suicide becomes attractive as the way out, if you will. And so we got a lot of work to do with that, because that in and of itself is bumping up our mortality rate. within the community, and is a serious health issue that I think we're not understanding it enough as a significant health issue in our community. And when you get to our mental health programs at SMA, we believe that part of what we're doing is helping people adjust and change their brain chemistry so that they have a better quality of life. And included in that is alleviating depression so that they don't reach the point where suicide becomes first a consideration and then in certain circumstances becomes something that's acted upon.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I find it interesting that when I go to the doctor now and they're getting ready to write a prescription or whatever, they said, "Are you depressed?"
Yeah.
They ask that question now. I don't remember them doing that,
Yeah.
you know, years back, but they do ask that, and I'm saying, am I depressed? I mean, I got a cold, you know. But that's good that they ask that, because there are people who are depressed, and sometimes the physical symptoms can mask the mental issues that a person's going through.
And well, think about it. You know, when you go to the doctor and you get your physical, I always think about that stethoscope being applied to you. And you know, they put it all over your back. They listen to your heart. You know, they listen to all of your organs. But I've never had a stethoscope put up to my head.
Right.
And the reality is that almost all of the organ systems in the body are being checked out, but not the brain.
Right.
And the way that you have to check out the brain is you have to ask the person, and then that person has to respond to you truthfully,
Right.
Which is another issue about that kind of assessment. But that kind of a question, that's an enlightened physician who is asking you at the time that he or she prescribes you medication, is there the possibility that there could be any interaction with your system that could enhance an existing disease like depression? And it's so common. Depression is kind of like the same rates almost as alcoholism. The lifetime prevalence of depression is about 1 in 10 across the population. So I'm glad that doctor asked me that question.
Absolutely. And you know, I've just seen it happening more and more with several settings. Even sometimes when you go to pick up your medication or whatever, or just before they're getting ready to prescribe, have you had any thoughts of you know, harming yourself or whatever? And I think sometimes it's tied to the medication they're giving you, which can actually lower your ability to fight something off and really have that kind of inner strength to say, no, I'm going to get better and I'm not going to hurt myself or whatever. But I agree. It's good that they're asking those questions. And in terms of funding, though, Chet, has there been this realization on the part of our legislators and those who are in charge of the money of the importance of adequately funding mental health programs? Because you know, you see what's going on around the country with young people, old people, whatever, killing. You know, the young people are being killed, bombs being set off. Some of it, you know, is tied to religion and the like. But there are other people in our own country who are doing stuff that to the normal person doesn't make any sense.
Right.
You know, and causing harm to yourself. There are people who cause harm, I know you know, cause harm to themselves and cause harm to other people. And there are a lot more people that would be going on with, were it not for some of the medication and some of the services and programs that you guys provide. But you know, where do we stand in terms of you know, the drug abuse, substance abuse realities, trends, but where do we stand too in terms of the reality check on the part of those who control the funding to actually understand that there's a need for funding?
Yeah, well, the short answer is that here in Florida, regarding the adequacy of funding for behavioral health care, short answer is no. We're nowhere near where we should be. In fact, according to who you talk to, Florida ranks anywhere from 47th to 49th.
We're doing so many important things.
Right,
Yeah.
and per capita funding for mental health treatment, and somewhere in the high 30s for addiction treatment. In this past session, there was an $8 million legislative appropriation for the first time for mental health crisis teams that would serve adolescents, individuals under the age of 18. Really intensive wraparound services for the most seriously mentally ill of our younger kids. But I got to tell you, $8 million is a drop in the bucket for those types of services. Beyond that, we essentially, in a year where we did have the tragedies that occurred in Connecticut and occurred in Colorado, and in a rebounding economy when there was more money available in the legislature, other than that program and a slight increase in funding for pregnant women who are addicted, there were no other increases in behavioral health care. And last Sunday, the News Journal wrote an editorial about this. Earlier in my career, we could count upon the legislature, not every year, but we could count on the legislature from time to time to provide what were called cost of living adjustments to providers. They kind of lifted all boats, allowed us to remain competitive in the employment market, and allowed us to expand services. We've not had those kinds of price level increases since the early 90s. So a generation has gone by now where the only new money that comes into the system is for new projects. There's nothing additional that supports the base. And if you look at your household budget, what it was back in '93 and what it was today, I can guarantee you it's not exactly the same.
Yeah.
So the problems that we wrestle with, and we're in the final stages of preparing our budget for next year right now at SMA, is that we go year to year to year, and we essentially have to keep finding ways to reinvent ourselves with the same amount of money, basically, in an environment where there's an ever-increasing need, not only because populations are growing, but because, just as we talked about with suicide, just because life is becoming much more difficult and complex and is generating more severe behavioral health issues. So there's a lot more that we could do, a lot more people that we could serve if there was the opportunity for us to be better funded. And I realize that that's not just in mental health, that's in so many areas. And so it's up to us to be as creative as we can be and to do everything that we can to stretch our resources as far as possible to provide the best care that we can provide to as many people as we can within the limitations of the dollars that we have to operate.
And to speak truthfully, you guys have been doing that. You guys, for the listeners, that's the Southern term, that we say down south, you guys, and it's non-generic. But, if we were to talk about some of your successes, we could talk about Project Warm and Drug Court.
Yeah.
I mean, both programs are very, very successful. I know the Junior League was responsible for starting Project Warm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, years
Started
ago.
Keeping up with us all the way along. They've been our partners from day one.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. And now, I know that you all you've transferred your those women's services for Warm to Burnell. You want to share with us a little bit about?
Sure. A year ago, as I said, one of the few ways in which we can grow our services is by getting specific funding for a specific activity. And Attorney General Bondi, over the last 2 years, has been very focused on services for addicted pregnant women. And out of that came an appropriation last year that allowed us to double the number of women.
And I think then Senator Lynn helped with that, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We're going to miss her. We really are in the legislature.
That's for sure. And so out of that, we've been able to increase the number of beds that we have for pregnant and primarily opiate-dependent women from 16 to 32. Those women are now housed. We moved our program earlier this year to accommodate the increase to our Vince Carter Sanctuary Complex in Bunnell. Partnering with Easter Seals, we expanded our child care center, and because of Senator Lynn's advocacy on this particular project, when we had our open house a couple weeks ago, we named the child care center in her honor.
Wonderful,
So it's the
wonderful.
Evelyn Lynn Child Development Center up there. And
very appropriate since before she went to the legislature, she had spent a good 30 years pretty much in the school system, Volusia County school system.
Exactly.
Yes.
So this area, and when you think about it, this is where we get a 2-for-1. You know, when we're assisting a mom with her recovery, and at the same time seeing to it that she completes her pregnancy and delivers a child that's drug-free, and then can continue in treatment. You know, literally, you know, you don't stay in the hospital very long after you have a baby anymore. These women are back in our care, back in treatment within sometimes 24 hours after they deliver.
Yeah.
It's just an ideal situation. And the complex, the Vince Carter Sanctuary Complex, which we built 4 years ago, is just ideally suited, both in terms of having a bit of remoteness and being in a pretty bucolic setting, but also having all the resources that we need. It's got the beds, it's got the treatment space, it's got the child care services, all on one campus, all self-contained. And through that program now, with its expansion, we serve Volusia and Flagler, and also Putnam and St. Johns County with that particular
Wonderful,
program.
wonderful. Now, when you say you serve those areas, your clientele comes from all of those areas?
Right, comes from those 4 counties. And in fact, a year ago, Stuart Marchman Center acquired what was prior to that called Putnam St. John's Behavioral Health Care. So that now for the last 15 months, we've also been a mental health provider in Putnam and St. Johns County. And we have clinics in both St. Augustine and in Palatka.
Wonderful. That is truly, truly awesome. Now, the drug court.
Oh, yeah.
And I know Judge Will speaks very, very highly of the drug court, of its success, but share with us the successes of the drug court and who it serves, because you educated me in terms of, even though I've heard Judge Will make a presentation on that, I always thought it was for first offenders and the younger group, but you're saying, no, that's not the case.
No, not really. And this is, we're right at the end of May, which is Drug Court Month across the country, and nationwide, in my career, I have never seen anything like drug court in terms of the kinds of synergy that it's created between the treatment and criminal justice systems. It's just, it's one of the very best things that we do. And you know, drug court is designed to take not a first offender, but more typically a person with a lengthy arrest history and a lengthy history of addiction, of being in treatment and then relapsing, either leaving treatment or relapsing after completing treatment, and working with that population with a focus and with an intensity that really helps people overcome their addiction. The typical length of time that a person spends in drug court is 15 to 18 months. And during that period of time, each time a person relapses, and you know, there are some people who go through drug court without ever relapsing, but that's more the exception than the rule. When they relapse, they are both supported and they are sanctioned by the program. And those sanctions could range anywhere from, you know, having to spend 2 or 3 nights in jail to other kinds of sanctions that the court can come up with. But also with that, if you're demonstrating that you know, you're not successful on an outpatient basis in staying clean, well, then we'll get you in a residential bed for a period of time. And there are some people who, I think I read about a case this past week somewhere else in Florida, where somebody graduated from drug court after being in it for 4 years.
Wow.
4 years. But drug court doesn't give up on people. You know, it used to be that we would say, well, you know, we'll give you a chance at treatment, but if you bomb out, well,
Right, that's
too
it,
bad. But the reality is that relapse is characteristic of the disease of addiction. And so that relapse needs to be seen as a part of the treatment process and addressed thoughtfully, and using the tools that we have available to us, and the best tool that we have in our therapy toolbox is something called cognitive behavioral therapy, is continuing to work with that person until their brain heals from their addiction, and we're also able to help them in learning new skills to go a different direction in life. And drug court hangs on to people long enough for that to happen, and it won't let them go. I think a judge will sometimes like a bulldog who just, he's, you know, got people in his jaws, and he's not going to let them go.
That's why he stood up to the police chief in Daytona Beach, because speaking up for that person, you know, and you know, you read it in the article where we're talking about the judge in reference to the police chief and this particular individual who had been a part of the drug court. And the judge said, I asked him if he did it, and he told me he didn't, and I believe him. You know, and I thought, you know, that sounds kind of naive. But when you've been working with someone to the extent that this program works with someone, you pretty much know, especially after you've dealt with those types of individuals for a long period of time. And he's been a part of drug court for several years, hasn't he? Yeah, you know pretty much when they're telling the truth or they're not, you know, when they've kind of slipped back or had a relapse or whatever. So he has a lot to hang his hat on when it comes to that decision and the direction that he went with that. So, and I know him too, and he's a good guy, the judge. But these are programs that have been super successful, and you guys actually are almost coming up with innovative ways and ways that can be shared and passed on to other locations, and I'm sure you do the same. So it's a sharing of information in terms of what best works.
It is, and I think the state of practice today in behavioral health is really a combination of, as I talked about earlier, primarily cognitive behavioral therapy, helping people to change the way they think, the way that they respond emotionally to different situations that they're in, and in many cases also utilizing some of the medications that we have available to us now to assist them in the treatment of not only their addiction, because there are a number of good medications that assist people in overcoming the cravings that are associated with their addiction, but also other medications, antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications that can also help people with some of the other mental health illnesses that they have that heretofore they've been treating with street drugs, rather than being treated under the supervision of a psychiatrist with the appropriate psychiatric medication. And I think more and more that's the direction that you're going to see our field continue to evolve, is the integration of counseling services and medical care. And that, again, as we grow, that's part of where the imperative comes for us to generate more resources, because when I got into this field 25 years ago, if we had a doctor be on duty, I think when I first got into this, maybe we had one doctor who would spend 10 hours a week with patients. Now we really need the full integration of medical care to go with the treatment of the brain that we're providing.
Let me say very quickly, you're listening to Truth with Gwen Azama-Edwards. My guest is Chet Bell, who is the CEO for the Stuart Marshman Act Behavioral Health Center. Did I get that right? Anyway.
Absolutely.
Hey, wow. And we're talking about, of course, substance abuse and mental health and the issues involved with that, as well as the help that is available for that as well. And Chet, before we go off, I do want to make sure that we cover an issue that we talked a little bit about before the show started, and that's the stigma that has been attached to individuals who receive psychiatric help, psychological help of any kind, even mental health. I can remember again years ago when I did career counseling, and we'd have people who actually were seriously in need of serious mental health help, and they were coming to a career counselor, and yeah, they needed a job, but they needed to deal with some of those other issues, as I said before they dealt with that. But they didn't want to go see psychologists, psychiatrists, even if it could be paid for, and sometimes that can be expensive, but even if it could be paid for, because they didn't want the stigma attached to that, because once you went to, they even ask you on job applications, have you ever received psychiatric help or whatever, mental health, blah, blah, this, that, and the other, and if you check yes on that, then that stigma and the stereotype that went with it stayed with that person for the rest of their days, and it sometimes, I think back then many times, prevented a person from getting certain types of jobs, and sometimes even getting a job, because they saw this person as a possible problem employee. Now, have things changed, have things improved in terms of an individual not only seeking out the help, but in terms of how people look at the fact that they've received that help? Because from what I'm seeing and hearing is that more and more people are seeking that help, and these are some so-called normal people who just need help, as you said, with sleep disorders, or they need help with maybe marital issues, other kind of personal relationship issues and the like. And instead of just writing to Dear Abby, and I know as a counselor, I read a lot of the self-help stuff, because you really, when you're counseling other people, you need help yourself. But has it changed in terms of the stereotypes that are attached to that kind of assistance?
Yeah, I think that the stigma of behavioral health disorders is decreasing. And part of that is simply everyone's recognition of just how prevalent these conditions are in society. As I said earlier, about a 1 in 10 chance that depression is going to be a part of your life at some point. That addiction, again, about a 1 in 10 chance that addiction is going to be a part of your life. And you can bump that up if you know you have a family history of, say, bipolar disorder. You know that the potential that you're going to experience the same illness is much higher. If there's a history of addiction in your family, that again, your potential for addictive disease is much higher. And I think there's a much greater recognition of that across society. That is still not to say that people are not discriminated against on the basis of their type of illness. We don't tend to make moral judgments on people that have heart disease. We don't tend to make moral judgments on people who have asthma. And I would argue to you that those are chronic diseases that have components that are hereditary. Some of them are environmental, and they're no different from addiction or schizophrenia, which have the same kind of etiology associated with them. But because they evidence themselves in what is sometimes seen as unusual behavior or difficulty in functioning, that's where the stigma comes from. But the good news is that these chronic diseases, like other chronic diseases, are eminently treatable. And people can return to a totally, quote, normal level of functioning for most. But they have to seek out good quality treatment, and then they got to adhere to it. And I'll tell you that trying to maintain a sober lifestyle is very much akin to someone who experiences diabetes and has to control their diet and their behavior and finds difficulty in doing that and relapses from time to time. We've got to be cognizant of that. And the more that we understand that these are chronic illnesses, the less stigma is going to be attached to it.
And I think more and more people we're hearing people talk about various types of addictions that in the past people never thought of as addictions. There are addictions that are tied to eating too much.
Yeah.
And I even witnessed a coworker who had an addiction to caffeine. You know, there are people who, they drink coffee every day, and if they were to stop drinking coffee, they'd have the shakes and everything else. They actually have had, it may be a milder form, but they've had an addiction to that caffeine. There are all kinds of, you know, there's addiction to sex, addictions to, I mean, you name it, there are addictions, and there's a need for the person to get their mindset in order to be able to function as a so-called normal person should function in terms of even relationships and the like. So recognizing that, we would hope that there is improvement in regard to how people view such assistance, and I think younger people probably view it as something that, hey, that's great, that person's really working to get their head on straight or whatever, as opposed to older people, you know, like myself, you know, over 60 or whatever, who would say, God, they got a problem, what's going on here, kind of stuff. So hopefully, you know, and we see this with our younger people, they're much more open to things, you know. So hopefully, as you know, as people get, you know, as the younger people get more involved with what's going on and the like, they'll even convince some of the older people that, yeah, it's good. It's a good thing. It's a good thing to really care enough about yourself and others to seek help.
Exactly.
That's a good thing. Yeah,
It really
and
is.
to applaud it, and to definitely applaud it. In terms of the legislative session that has just ended and the like, and you've talked about the funds that were made available. What are some other things, though, since Florida is still way down there in terms of funding mental health, and in terms of really funding education and a lot of the things that we think of as important to life, really, in truth, to life. What are other things that you guys have been pushing for and that you're hoping that the legislature or others will help you with?
Well, the number of people that we treat who have severe and persistent mental illness in the 4-county service area that we now serve more than 7,000 outpatients. And we need additional assistance in order to be able to serve all of those people, because they require the services of a psychiatrist or a psychiatric nurse practitioner, and for many of them, in order to assist them with their quality of life, they also need a therapist and they need a case manager to kind of help them navigate life with a chronic mental illness. These are areas where, as this population continues to grow, we just really haven't seen any additional resources coming our way. And you know, one of the things that we've been preparing for, particularly because we're a safety net provider and we tend to serve the working poor, and we serve those many people who are Medicaid eligible, was, you know, we've been preparing for Medicaid expansion. And Florida's decision to
not accept those funds.
Yeah, to not accept those funds leaves a kind of an odd circumstance where the very poorest individuals in the community are now the ones that are going to be least likely to be able to access Medicaid, particularly men. If you are at 100% of poverty or below, and you're male, you remain really not eligible for Medicaid. If you're between 100% and 400% of the poverty level, you are going to be able to participate in the healthcare exchanges. But it's the poorest individuals in our community that are being kind of shut out of this process. And so, you know, I'm not second guessing the legislature on this, but we're going to have to continue to try and find a way to make sure that those individuals that are really in need of safety net services can get to them. So we've got more work to do in that regard.
And the insanity of it all, actually, But even in terms of the individuals, and I was glad to hear you say that those who are truly in crisis, that you'll find something, be able to do something with them until you're able to get them to a bed or something else, because there are individuals in our community who many our listeners may not know that years ago a decision was made to shut down the hospitals that had beds, forensic beds and the like, for individuals who really and truly needed to be somewhere, off the streets, but they decided that they would send them back to their communities, and many of those people are some of the homeless people you see on the street. They will inconsistently take their medications. You see them walking, they're talking to themselves, or you look around and there's nobody there but them, and they don't have a phone thing in their ear either, so they're really pretty much talking to themselves. A lot of those people, I guess, are considered to not so much be a danger to others as more of a danger to themselves, but in actuality, homeless people find themselves in some serious situations, in serious environments, where even though they try to look out for each other, they don't know when the next crisis is going to hit for someone who's a part of their group, where that person may all of a sudden really just start lashing out. So there's a lot of that's going on behind the scenes, as well as I think homes where they're dealing with situations where the unemployment, is getting ready to run out for those who've had long-term unemployment. You've got people who still cannot find jobs, even though people say there's all kinds of jobs out there. And it's not just because they're choosy about what they get, but some people really don't feel confident enough that they can do certain things. They just don't have that confidence. So it's good that your program is there. It's good that for the women who find themselves, in the WARM program, who are expecting a young one, can find help as well. I saw something as I was looking on the internet that spoke to legal services. Are there legal services you guys provide, or?
Well, only in terms, we assist families in the implementation of the Marchman Act and the Baker Act. And that kind of court liaison function is designed, because Florida is, and it's not this way in every state in the union, that for an individual who's a danger to himself or others as a result of mental illness or addiction, family members can initiate a civil process to bring their case to the attention of a court, and then have the court direct an evaluation and an assessment of the need for treatment. So that is the area of law, if you will, that we get involved in, is assisting families in going through that process of starting that civil court procedure.
And we're able, in our state, you're able to actually Baker Act yourself if you see yourself in some kind of a situation where you really can't control things. And the problem with that, from what I gather, is that just like you sign yourself in, you can sign yourself out.
Yeah, I think the notion of that is I don't see that, and I'm not aware of that typically happening, because if you are at the point where you recognize your need for treatment, you can place yourself into treatment voluntarily. You don't need to involuntarily commit yourself. So the involuntary process happens through either a law enforcement officer who can bring you to our receiving facility as a result of determining that you're a danger to yourself or others in the community. It can be through what's called a physician's certificate, where a physician indicates that you have that need for an evaluation, or it can be based upon family members' written statements that an individual constitutes a danger to themselves or others. And we, that's one of the things that through our Access Center we're happy to talk with and assist families who are reaching out for some way to raise the bottom, if you will, in order to get somebody who's very treatment resistant to get the opportunity to get started in treatment.
Utilize your services. Now, where are you located again? And give a website, and if there is a phone number that someone can use to contact you guys. If a family member or someone else or the person themselves just say, you know, I'm tired of this, I'm ready, I acknowledge I have a problem, I need help, I can't do it by myself, how do they contact you?
Yeah, anywhere in our 4-county service area. Our assessment center, which operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Oh, okay.
There's always people there answering the phone, is 1-800-539-4228. And that access center can link you to any of our services at SMA, and it is also a regional suicide hotline. So whether you're calling to make an appointment for an outpatient visit, or you're inquiring about the Marchman Act or the Baker Act, or you're in severe psychological crisis yourself right now, that's the number to dial, 800-539-4228. Our website is smabehavioral.org, and again, if you want to, through email, make contact with our Access Center, it's just access@smabehavioral.org, and that Access Center is also monitoring our email 24 hours a day. So that's the one point to access our services.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, hopefully we've covered, I know we've covered at least 90-some% of what it was we were going to talk about. I know that one of the things you had mentioned that I don't think we've covered to any great extent or any extent has to do with the Department of Corrections inmates. And there are services that are provided, that you provide at the Correctional Center for mental health?
Yeah, actually outside of that, but and many people are familiar because it's existed in our community literally since the 1970s, is Reality House.
Yeah, oh, I'm very familiar with Reality House. I've toured it, and it's a wonderful program.
And Reality House is really a model program in the state corrections system, because it's a 115-bed program that is all state prison inmates who are in the latter stages of their sentence. We pick up with them when they're anywhere from 12 to 18 months from the end of sentence. As much as possible, we're trying to get individuals who ultimately are going to be are from this area and are going to be released back into the community. And we involve them in a treatment program for the better part of a year, and then we have the availability for them to step down into work release, so that they continue to start making the first steps out into the community, still going out to work and that sort of thing while they're coming up on the end of sentence, and then coming back to Reality House at night and continuing their treatment and therapy. And earlier this year, we were awarded by the Department of Corrections an additional 60 beds for that program.
Wow.
So we're going to be up to 175 beds for Reality House. And it cuts recidivism rates among the people that we serve at Reality House by about 2/3 from the typical state prison inmate. Right now, about 1 out of every 3 released inmates is back in custody in the state prison system within 3 years. With Reality House graduates, it's more like 1 in 10. So it's
what a difference!
Yeah.
What a difference! Now, as I recall, when Reality House started, you had to have multiple.
There was at early on. There was a co-occurring component to Reality House. Here, to use that phrase, the reality is today that an addiction issue is required in order to be part of the Reality House program, but we also assess at the time of admission what other co-occurring illnesses an individual may have, and if there's the need to also access psychiatric care, that sort of thing, during the course of treatment, that's also available for anyone who comes into the program.
And the great thing about the program is that we know that for many people, even if they receive all the help in the world, if they go right back into that area, that environment, that played a major role in the issues that they're dealing with, there's a relapse, and there's a greater chance of a relapse. So this allows them to have kind of a safe haven while they're going through their therapy and trying to get their lives back together. So it's fantastic.
Right, and the opportunity to practice the things that they've learned while they're in treatment, be exposed to the kinds of situations that trigger craving, and then be able to go back to the program and work with their fellow inmates and the therapists there to process those activities and assist them in building up the coping skills necessary to resist those cravings and that temptation to use again when it occurs.
Now, another last thing that I see, and I don't know how quickly you can do this, mental health first aid.
Yeah, yes. Mental health first aid is just what you might be thinking. You go to a physical first aid course to learn some of the immediate things that you can do when somebody has a physical health crisis. Mental health first aid is a program that we offer to the local community for a nominal charge that assists, whether it's teachers or law enforcement or family members of someone who's mentally ill, or just an interested citizen in what are the things that you can do as a first responder, if you will, to somebody who's in a mental health crisis. And we offer that numerous times during the year, and love to do it with groups who are interested in mental health issues.
Absolutely, because I know you can say the wrong thing, the wrong word, and it's a trigger that, before you know it, wow, all things are out of control. Oh, Chet, thank you for coming on, and I really, I know this has been informative to me. I know it has been to the listeners as well. Again, for everyone, that assessment center, access center number, also the regional number for suicide hotline is 1-800-539-4228, and it's SMA-behavioral.org.
Correct.
Absolutely, for the website. Thank you again. Oh, this has just been phenomenal. I appreciate you so much coming on. Those of you who are Facebook friends know that Linda Merrill wants to come on, and she had a family thing that she needed to go to, and she called on Chet, and Chet immediately said, yes, I'm happy to go on the program. And I thank you again for coming on the program, because this has just been so informative.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
To our listeners, remember to join us every Thursday starting at 6:15 as we discuss issues that will do what? Inform and empower you, our listeners. Also, be sure to go to the website at www.gwen-truth.com. And as you know, we do put the super majority of our shows, we upload them onto YouTube, so that you can go back and you can actually look at and watch, the program in its entirety. So we would encourage you to do that, and you can access it by going to www.gwen-truth.com. So until next time, hey, be informed, be empowered, stand tall for that which is right and truthful. And like myself, Gwen Azama-Edwards, your talk show host, and like Chet Bell, the CEO of Stuart Marshman ACT Behavioral Health Center, or Healthcare. You keep standing tall for that which is right and truthful. Until next time, God bless and have a great weekend. Thank you again, Chet.
Thank you, Gwen.
That's awesome.